Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is on your side, to everyone who's joining us this morning. And we are delighted to have you this morning, and we are hoping that by the end of the time that we have asked of you, we would have a very fruitful conversations and we'll walk away with uh, concrete action steps for young people. We welcome you to the webinar titled Preparing Youth-Led Networks for Global Fund Grant Cycle 8 Grant Writing, or just in overall Grant Cycle 8 engagement for the Global Fund grant cycles. As we may all know that the Global Fund has issued out GC8 allocation letters to countries to start applying for their country allocations for the GC8. And we took this upon ourselves as Y Plus Global and the partnering organizations, which I'll mention just in a few, to have this webinar to walk young people through the processes and what the expectation would look like for GC8 and how best you can engage in that processes. As we all know that sometimes we are engaged in the process at a very late stage, or we are not even included in the processes of grant writing, or what exactly it looks like when a country receives an allocation letter, and then what happens through to the end of the implementation of that particular grant. Um, on this particular webinar, we've partnered with the Global Fund Youth Council, the Communities Delegation to the Global Fund Board, the NGO Delegation to UNAIDS PCB, and the Regional Hub for Anglophone Africa, hosted by EANNASO. And we are hoping that you will be able to get a lot of perspective into the Grant Cycle 8 preparations. Before we go anywhere further, we are offering translation for our webinar in French and in Portuguese. If you tap on the icons at the bottom of either your phone or your laptop. For some, I know it would be at the top of your laptop. Just tap there and scroll a bit. Either on more, you'll see interpretation. If it's not on more, you scroll to the far end, you'll see a global icon. That's where you tap and you can select the interpretation that you wish to listen to the conversation in, either in French or in Portuguese. And then we kindly request that you use the chat box to introduce yourselves, where you are from, where you are joining us from, and also just for the questions that you might have as the conversations are going, so that we don't interrupt the conversations up until the Q&A. There will be Q&As at one point. And our webinar will be in two parts. That will be the two panel discussions. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to the first moderator, who will be moderating a panel discussion on understanding Global Fund Grant Cycle 8 development process and how young people can strongly engage. And that would be Eddie Rudram from Y Plus Global.
Thank you so much, Faith, for that lovely intro. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone, and welcome. As Faith mentioned, my name is Eddie, and I'm the Communications and Advocacy Manager at Y Plus Global. I am based in Bangkok. I've been working now for nearly a decade within the HIV space across civil society and the UN, focusing on HIV, LGBTQ plus rights and strengthening youth-led advocacy. So I'm great and I'm very honored to be moderating this conversation today, especially at such an important moment as we move into the Global Fund Grant Cycle 8. Now, as Faith has briefly mentioned, this session is really about understanding GC8 and how it works in practice, and more importantly, where and how young people can meaningfully engage. So we know that the grant processes shape what gets funded. But what are those priorities? What are the other priorities for young people? And ultimately, how do we reach young people? But too often, and as we've known and we've seen in the past, youth-led networks are sort of brought in very late, or sometimes not at all. So as we navigate the discussion, it's also too important to reflect on how young people have been engaged in previous cycles, whether that's the GC7 or the GC6, or even earlier, and to build on those experiences and best practices to strengthen how we can show up in GC8. Now, towards the end, you'll hear more about the resources that have been developed by young people for young people to support this engagement. So you'll be able to get copies of those resources as well. So today's conversation is all about unpacking how the process works at the country level, identifying some of the real entry points for engagement, and learning from those who are already navigating and influencing these spaces. So without further ado, let me introduce some of the panelists that we have, and hopefully we can spotlight you guys. Um, Sorry, I have to maneuver this and find you in my. I'll actually, Tawanda, I'll ask you to kindly help us spotlight the panelists. Really pleased to be joined by an incredible group of speakers. We have Priscilla Ama-Addo joining us from Ghana. She represents the Communities Delegation to the Global Fund and works with Wipers Global. She brings in strong experience in youth-led advocacy and global health programming. We are also joined by Annabelle Metzner, the Technical Advisor for Community Engagement in the Global Fund's Community Rights and Gender Department, where she supports community engagement and leads key initiatives to strengthen the participation of people living with and affected by HIV in health responses. And then we also have Bella Aubrey, a youth and human rights advocate from Indonesia, currently the chair of the Global Fund Youth Council and national coordinator of Inti Muda, working to advance the rights and health of young key populations. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think we're meant to spotlight Gabriella, but I can see Gabby, you're right there. Um,
Yeah.
maybe we can find a way to spotlight Annabelle. But maybe we'll, just before I just start into the transition and we can find Annabelle on the screen, just a quick note, like Faith said, we have time for questions at the end of each of the sessions, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout, and we'll do our best to bring them into the discussion. If time allows it, we might also open the floor for a few live answers and questions. I also do encourage you to use the emojis and the reaction buttons. We have them, so please feel free to show some love and support as we are going. So let's dive into the conversation. Priscilla, I would love to start with you if that's okay.
Yes, that's okay.
I would love to know what are the key priorities and timelines for GC8? This is the main question that everybody's asking. What should youth-led networks be paying attention to right now?
Thank you so much, Eddie. So with timelines, we are all aware in early March, allocation letters were sent out for GC8 stating the funding amounts that were eligible for countries. Close to over 120 countries have gotten their letters. And for some countries, this would be their last grant cycle. For others, their letters state that they have only 2 grants to receive from the Global Fund till they transition and the country is basically going to have to fend for itself. So there's a lot happening in the global space when it comes to Global Fund. So timeline 1 is the allocation letters being received. Timeline 2 is now submission timelines, which are in 3 stages. So there's window 1, which is in June, which is 8th June. Window 2, which is 27th July, and then window 3, which is the 5th of October. So countries will have to decide which window they would like to submit their grants request in. Some countries have started the process, right, in preparing for the submission. Other countries are looking at submitting in July and October. And so it's up to countries to decide how they are going to, which timeline suits them best. So right now, priorities for the Global Fund is mainly looking at how countries can sustain progress with the little funding that is coming in, grants have been cut actually. Compared to GC7, grants have reduced by a tremendous amount. And we saw this during the allocation or reprioritization process that happened middle of last year, where countries' budgets for Global Fund were reduced because of the US issues and all that. So this grant cycle, we are seeing a minimal, some form of cuts, some countries by 25%, others by whopping 50%. So what does this mean? This means that communities' budget or communities' interventions and priorities will receive very little now. In some countries, it's already little. So imagine with less money now. So priorities as a whole, it's very important that for us as young people, we join the conversation as early as possible. What do I mean by that? Before the grant request writing process takes place, there's country dialogue that happens where the CCM, the country coordinating mechanism, brings together various partners, various communities, various civil society organizations, government, of course, being in there, academia, faith-based organizations, a very diverse engagements with different communities on what priorities should go into the grant. So this is a very key moment where young people, youth-led organizations can capitalize on to push for youth priorities. What are the gaps when it comes to youth services within your country? And how can you ensure that these gaps are taking note of during the country dialogue and eventually being pushed into the grant? So priorities have to be very targeted, have to be very much agreed on by the communities and the civil society organizations themselves. And these conversations have started happening. So it is very important that youth-led networks seek out for when these engagements are happening and how to collectively push for common priorities and common gaps that have been taken note of. And I would like to mention that the national strategic documents when it comes to HIV, TB, and malaria are key, because these documents are what have been agreed on by countries on what they want to push strategically when it comes to these three disease areas, right? So these documents eventually inform what will go into the Global Fund grants. So this is a key way to see that what are the priorities of your country when it comes to HIV, malaria, and TB, and how can you ensure that it is more targeted for young people, or young people's priorities eventually make their way in there. So I will stop here for now. For you to continue.
Thank you, Priscilla. Now, I know that you have gone through this process before in the GC7, right? Can you just quickly let us know what that was like for a young person? And did you see your needs and priorities reflected in those changes?
Okay, so I was part of the GC7 process in my country, Ghana. It was a very hectic process. It started with the country dialogues and then the grants writing process, which was very heated because every community is trying to ensure that their priorities make it into the budget. And that is where you see cuts being made, reduced, interventions being, removed and all that. So it's a very, very heated process. It's also the place where words get exchanged. And for some countries, I've heard even it gets a bit violent, which is so sad to hear. But it's a moment of intensity, and it is very important that you align with people, allies, who are also for your priorities or also for your interventions, to push together and ensure that interventions are budgeted for. Then eventually it goes to the TLP, where again they discuss and look at value for money, relevance, and all that before it eventually gets approved and then implementation starts.
Okay, then maybe just a quick follow-up question to that then. If you could do something or offer a piece of advice to the process last time, what would you do differently?
I think what I would do more differently is to not be afraid to shout back, because I would not lie, it gets really intense. Because you see government officials, fighting and arguing and throwing words. And so be prepared, essentially. Be prepared for it to get ugly, but don't let it shock you to the extent that you become quiet. Push to be in the room, even if you are standing, right? To ensure that your youth priorities are in there. And use the modular framework or use your strategies, your national strategies and priorities and country dialogues to push for these priorities to be noticed and included in this grant.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you're completely right. This is the space that we need to occupy. This is the space that we need to raise our voices. Young people at most are the ones that have the issues when it comes to engagement. So it's about taking up the space. It's about ownership. It's about agency. So thank you for offering some of that advice. Annabelle, I would like to turn now the questions to you, if that's okay. And thank you so much for joining. I think a lot of young people who are here really benefit from having somebody from the Global Fund speak with us. From your perspective, what would you say is the most important entry points for communities and youth networks to engage in this process?
Thanks so much for the question. And I just also want to start by thanking Y Plus Global and all the collaborating organizations for this super timely and very critical webinar. I just also want to say I'm so inspired by the work you do on a daily basis. And I'm happy to share some insights very complementary to what Priscilla has already described in terms of the overall grant cycle and the key timelines for you to keep in mind. I mean, country dialogue also in GC8 will follow some key principles around transparency and inclusiveness. And that's something for you to remember also if you're maybe not in the room, that you can really push for inclusiveness. But on the other hand, it also needs to really involve, because we see that the context for GC8 has rapidly evolved over the last month and year. And that's why also country dialogue has to evolve and be more integrated, to have more cross-disease conversations and also be tailored to different country contexts. Priscilla already spoke about transition, and a number of countries have received through their allocation letters the information that this will be their last grant, or that they maybe will have a grant in GC8 and one last grant in GC9. So we really see accelerated timelines for transition. And depending on that, the modality and the way countries will develop their funding requests will also be slightly different. This time around, we will have different application modalities. I will not go into detail, but this is around, will this be a focused application or full review? And this really just means what type of documents are the countries asked to submit. But then there will also be some differences between countries around what we call the submission pathway. And that's really more around the role of the CCM, roles and responsibilities around developing the funding requests. And what is really new here in the cycle, that we will have a submission pathway called Grant Ready, where the PR will be involved much earlier in the conversations. And I'm really flagging this because some of you might be surprised to not see the classic process that you may have seen in GC7, but a slightly different process with earlier engagement of the PR. And this will also require to adapt a little bit your strategies and who you're working with and the entry points you can find. We all know that community engagement is not only important during funding request development, it's equally important during the development of the national strategic plans, which in many countries have already been revised or are in the process of being revised. We see several countries that are developing integrated NSPs. So that engagement in that process is really the basis also for the grants, because grants shall be strongly aligned with the national strategies. But we also know that engagement during grant making is equally important. In the past, we have seen often a drop of engagement after funding request development. So that's really something I think I also want to sensitize you for, to continue pushing to be at the table during the grant making phase. Some of you may have heard about what we call the community engagement minimum expectations, and these were formulated in GC7. They continue into GC8, and these are really some expectations around that bring transparency to community asks and transparency to the process. One includes the community priority annex. That's a mandatory annex for high impact portfolios and core portfolios that can include up to 20 priorities. Important to note is that these really need to be the priorities across constituencies. So as Priscilla mentioned earlier, there will need to be some discussion and some alignment on which of these 20 priorities will be the top priorities that the CCM will submit alongside the funding request. But this process of developing the priority annex can be a key opportunity for adolescents and youth to contribute to. And then the second is really during grant making, where we have a requirement that the CCM convenes at least 2 meetings for the PR to update on the progress of the grant making, to really give more insights around how the grant is being developed, how the budget is adapted potentially. And I think that's a key opportunity also for you to understand and interrogate the grant making process and the inclusion of some of your priorities. I'll keep it here and over to you, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. And you brought up so many interesting and noteworthy issues. I mean, the top 20 priorities for the CCM, how do you decide on the top 20, right? And more importantly, we're talking about bringing young people into those conversations, into that mix. So they need to be part of the conversations when it comes to deciding that top 20 as well. Just one quick follow-up question for you, Annabelle, if that's okay. What practical advice would you like to give to youth-led networks as a way to help strengthen some of the advocacy around the GC8 to ensure that their needs are reflected in the GC8?
Thanks so much. I think my first key message is really to not assume the status quo, that the context has really changed from GC7 to GC8, and that you will see shifts in this cycle. We see shift in reduction of country allocations, but also topics like integration will be very prominent. So it will also require some adaptation of your thinking and the advocacy strategies. The second is really around what we know, that knowledge is power. So I think you can prepare by knowing your current grant really well. And Priscilla spoke about GC7 reprioritization. So it would be good to understand where did the discussions land, what was included in the revised budget after reprioritization, and not also understand the past, but also the future, get access to the allocation letter. And there are great tools out there and colleagues that have started to track allocation letters, so we can also post that in the chat. Then know the guidance from the Global Fund. I think most importantly, what we have is, and what will soon be published, is the modular framework. That's basically the overview of all interventions that can potentially be eligible. And that can be a little bit your compass. If you discuss priorities at country level, you can go back to the modular framework and see, is it included or are we really off track? Because if you're off track, very low possibility to probably include those priorities. And then the last one is about the process. And Priscilla also already shared about the process, but I will also put some slides in the chat where you can understand a little bit more detailed what the process look like. I think the third one is really around anticipating that information doesn't flow easily. So I think it's so important to stay up to date on CCM communication through your CCM representatives, or if you're not represented in the CCM, by connecting through other constituencies. And sometimes it's around being in that one WhatsApp group where a lot of discussion is happening and where you see the energy is in the room. And I think it will particularly be important because in this cycle, we will also use much more what is called the partner portal. That's a portal where the CCM can upload and download information. So I think it will be key to stay up to date on those processes as well. The fourth one is really around building a strong rationale for your priorities. And Priscilla has said you have to be very targeted around what you're asking for. And I think some key questions you can keep in mind is around, does the priority align with the modular framework and the national strategic plan? How will the priority help to advance some of the strategic shifts for GC8, for instance, service integration? And is this priority backed by data, including CLM or community data? But you can also reach out to others to strengthen your arguments. I'm thinking here about technical partners to have the latest epidemiological information. And then the last point is really around building on what's already there. There is a great array of tools, and I think we'll discuss about this later from our side. We are updating what we call the Community Engagement Toolbox. It includes a range of tools, including for how to do community consultations, how to cost priorities, some policy briefs on sustainability transition, integration. So you can really build on some of the tools that are already there that can also allow you some faster, identification of strong arguments during your advocacy. So I think these are some more practical things that I would recommend you to keep in mind. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. And I can see the comments are flooding in. I've just spotted one comment. Maybe if you just quickly answer this one, Annabelle, before I jump into Bella. Somebody asked when the modular framework will be out. Do we have an idea?
Very soon. So I'll keep you posted. Once it's available, it's on the Global Fund website. I'll put the link here, and usually also an update is sent to the CCMs. So I think it should be out in the next couple of days.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Annabelle. And now we have Bella. Hi, Bella, how are you doing?
Great and busy.
Good. I'm just coming to you now since you are the chair of the Global Youth Council. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. From the previous grant cycles, what are some of the biggest lessons learned when it comes to meaningfully engaging young people and also the wider community?
Yes, I think one key lesson from the previous cycle, GC7, is that meaningful engagement does not happen automatically, and youth networks have to be proactive and sometimes even demanding for our engagement. And also that youth networks needs to actively claim their spaces in this global fund processes, and also following the timeline that already exists, and then reading all those documents and materials, and also continuously engage in all processes, because sometimes we only focus in the first making proposal in the funding request, but we don't really navigate after that the implementation, the oversight, which then also really important to make sure that our things that we put in the proposal are being implemented. And also this is really important to building allies with the system. And because like some country has a CCM, a youth representative there, but some of country are not. So we really need to build good allies in the CCM, technical working groups, civil society partners, and technical stakeholders who are understand like youth priorities can make a big difference in the global fund processes. And this ally can help ensure that youth perspective are brought into this discussion, and also the country proposal. And also finally, I think it's really important that a coordination among youth across the country is really important, because like when youth voice are united and backed by clear priorities and community evidence, they become much harder to ignore. So yeah, overall meaningful engagement require proactive youth leadership, and then strong alliance, and also coordinate for advocacy.
Couldn't agree anymore. I think when youth networks and organizations come together, they form a unified voice. And usually that is louder than if you try to do it alone and you don't really see those changes. And just going back to what you said earlier, and this is something I often say in the work as well, that the chair in the room doesn't automatically belong to you. So if you're entering a space, you need to figure out how you're going to sit on that chair. It's not just sitting down. It's about making yourselves known and making sure that it's meaningfully engaged, right? Follow-up question to you, Bella. Can you share an example of how communities and youth networks have maybe successfully influenced funding priorities? Maybe you can speak to Indonesia here if you wanted to. What made that possible?
Yeah, so in GC7 processes, we finally get an opportunity to push the community annex. So specifically for the youth, so we are pushing our concept note that we developed, and that is a good achievement. And one key factor behind the success is the preparation and also evidence. Like when youth networks come to country dialogue funding request processes with clear priorities, data from communities, and also concrete recommendation, it become much easier for decision maker to like integrate this priority that we bring to the grant. And also what makes this effort successfully was usually, like, I would say, three things. The first one is youth networks were organized and also coordinate, like what I said, and also like engage early in the country dialogue, which this is kind of the problem in the GC8 that I noticed, because the timeline is very tight. The window when it's June, and we haven't had enough discussion within the youth networks, like how we could build the community annex together, and also work together with a broader community movement. It's really important because what we notice is when we are developing this concept not to be in the community annex, is we also get support from the Catholic Fund that are available in the Seven Alliance in the Asia Pacific, which is the learning hub that we could access, and also the regional youth organization that help us how we could engage in the GC7. And I think there's some module and document that we could also share after about this, and that really useful for us in Indonesia to get this best practices. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I just want to ask you one last question, Bella. I know I didn't have this scripted, but it's the same question I asked Priscilla. What would probably be your biggest takeaway from the last GC7? That's something that youth-led networks need to know.
Yeah, so reflecting that my organization, like in Indonesia, push to be like in a community annex. We already did that, but the thing that we missed in the GC7 is how we could see the grant making processes, because like it already exists in a proposal, but we couldn't see how this annexes could be translated in the grant making processes, like how it could be translated to the activity and also budget. So we are kind of lost in that, and we need to make sure that all this community priority could be also translated in the grant making processes, and how we could engage in the grant making processes, since there's like a different, like Annabelle said, there's a grant ready setting, and many things that might be different from the GC7, and we need to be aware of that in the GC8. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bella. And I'm already starting to hear very similar responses from the three of you in that the process looks very different for each country. And engagement also looks very different. So it's very important for you to not just sit around and wait for things to happen. It's important for you to reach out. It's to speak to the representatives within the CCM or within any other bodies, those who are in positions of power, leveraging the connections that you have to ensure that you are meaningfully engaged. So I hope that this has been helpful for the people who have joined us today to better understand what that process looks like, but more importantly, what it means for young people to make themselves heard and known in the GCA. I've seen some questions in the chat. Yes, this is being recorded, so if you miss out on anything or critical pieces of info, you can rewatch it on YouTube later on. We'll also send out an email to all the participants with all the resources that we have referenced within this webinar. Now we have time for a few questions. Somebody do keep me on check if I go over time, but I think we have about 10 minutes. I already see that we have 2 hands raised. So we can offer you 20 to 30 seconds to please ask your question. And if anybody else wants to ask that question, that's fine. But please be direct, make it very short, okay? We don't need your life story. We just need the question. Tawanda, if you can support me, please, in helping with unmuting people. Do we have Tawanda here? Yes,
the people with hands raised. Yes.
yes.
Hello. You can hear me, right?
We can hear you, Festus.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Eddie. My specific question goes to now that we are talking about youth and engagement in the process of writing the grant. How do we intend to engage and make sure that voices of youth with disabilities are part and parcel of the conversations on the tables of dialogues and eventually in the rooms that Priscilla say that they are somehow chaotic at times. So what measures are there to make sure that voices of youth with disability, especially those with intellectual disability, are in the room to bring out their issues, because the conversation of youth includes also youth with disabilities and more about persons with intellectual disability, persons with neurodiverse conditions, and persons with various needs. Talk about persons who are young and who are deaf blind. For instance, how do they come into this conversation, and are their interventions or their voices brought onto these tables to also be factored in the grant?
Okay. Thank you so much, Festus, for your question. We'll take a couple of more questions and we'll allow the panelists to respond to whichever. But just a summary, I think Festus wanted us to better understand how do we make it as inclusive as possible for those who are people living with disabilities or those who are neurodivergent. So just as for the panelists. We'll take a couple of more questions now. I see that the United Youth for Sustainable Globe, Eswatini, your mic is off. Do you have a question for the panelists?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to share my question. My first question, I've already inserted it on the Q&A. I hope the panel will go there and respond. And my second question, it is to anyone who can respond. What strategies are being prioritized to ensure LGBTQI youth and young sex workers and also other marginalized young people are explicitly included and funded within the GC8 proposal? And my last one would be, what concrete mechanism will now ensure that youth-led network access Global Fund directly without going through, like we, as young people also, we have an opportunity to actually become PRs or SRs. Yes, that's my question.
Thank you so much for your questions. For the panelists, I think just as a summary, the strategies about, creating inclusive spaces for LGBTIQ plus and marginalized communities, and also the mechanisms where they can meaningfully engage with the Global Fund directly. Okay, we'll take a couple of more questions. We have Max Gillica. What's your question, Max? Is Max still here? If not, maybe we can take a question from Huzairu Nzanzi.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Nyanzi Uzairu from Uganda. I work with a network of young people living with HIV in the eastern part of Uganda. My concern is may not be much about the GC8, because I've been part of the process in the country, and I want to appreciate our representative on the CCM, Ruth, is here. She has labored so much to involve us and ensure young people are involved. We have even developed a position paper, what we are terming as non-negotiable for young people in these writing processes. And I would recommend even to other countries where they are youth representative on the CCM, please ensure you have non-negotiables in this process, because now, for example, reflecting on Uganda as a country, the government want to take it all. So it is a competition between the civil society and the government. So you have to be very clear on what you want. You have to state it clearly and without fear or anything, that these are non-negotiable. And more so for young people, we have to have a plan in place, and it has to be written, and it has to be distributed even prior and stated clearly that these are non-negotiable for young people. The other one is a quick one. I've seen someone from Y Plus Global. Who I would like to inquire about the processes of becoming a member of Y Plus Global. When the last call came out for members, we applied, but unfortunately, when the list came through for members, we were unfortunate to be not part of the list or not to be included. And yet, this is something we really want to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions, and I can quickly respond to that. Tawanda will drop you the email address, membership@yplusglobal.org. You can send your questions and queries directly there. But yes, for the remainder of the session, let's try to keep the questions related to the Global Fund processes. But yeah, he'll drop the email in the chat box for you. I will take one last question from Abdul Kadir, and then we'll leave it there for the panelists to respond to some of those questions. Abdul?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the panelists for their presentation, well digested. So mine is at country level, like for us in Sierra Leone. Now, is it the Global Fund, the call for proposal, is it going to be separate, or is it going to be at country-led? We are in, as country-led, the youth organizations we partner through CCM, through the government to apply. It's going to be separate, wherein the youth-led organization will all apply. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Okay, so we've got a variety of different questions right here. Some related more to the strategies and mechanisms, some's more about making the process more inclusive. I will go through each of the panelists, Priscilla first, then Annabelle, then Bella, and see if you wanted to respond in general or in particular to any of those specific questions. Priscilla, would you like to give it your best shot first?
Yeah. I think in regards to strategies, for my knowledge, I know that CCMs in generally CCMs have to have an HIV substantive, a TB substantive, a malaria substantive, right? And even some have youth seats, youth substantives. Then there are alternates as well. So most of the time for HIV, it's the national people living with HIV organizations within each country, like in Ghana, the Ghana National Network of People Living with HIV, who have a seat at the CCM. So they are part of the conversation, and they represent diverse groups of people living with HIV, so including persons living with disabilities, right? Aside the country dialogues where they engage their communities in getting their priorities and all that, which is a good strategy. There's also the opportunity to join the writing process, but as an observer, they give that opportunity as well, right? So you don't get to participate actively, but you can see what is going on and observe. So the key would be to align with people who are going to be in the writing committees, right? The networks of people living with HIV affected, the key KVPs, and ensure that you are letting them know, you are making them aware of the issues that are relevant to your community members. So again, that is where the alignment comes in. You have to create allies who are already in the process. So my suggestion would be, Annabelle put in the chat a link to go and find out who your CCM reps are, right? Who is on your CCM. I would advise people to reach out to the admin of the CCM, ask them which window is our country. They have to give you that information. Which window is our country planning to submit in? What are the dates? When are we planning the country dialogues? When is the grant writing going to start? They have to give you that information. And that's a way to know what is going on and how to be part of that conversation. Again, because it's a very tedious process, they don't open it to the general public when they start writing the grant. So you have to connect with your network that are representing the disease component on the CCM to see what is going on and how to ensure that these priorities are made in there. So that is what I'll have to say.
Thank you, Priscilla. And you are right. That was a very good piece of advice. You sound like somebody who knows the system very well, and she's done this before. Contact the admin of the CCM, find out their contacts. That's some really solid advice. So if young people want to get in touch with their local CCMs, listen to what Priscilla did. Annabelle, do you have any sort of reactions to some of those questions as well?
Yes, thanks so much. And I'm also busy responding to some questions in the chat and in the Q&A. I'll try to do my very best to respond. Just about the point around the inclusiveness, I think it's so key, and I think we also need to be mindful that for these discussions at the CCM level and in the writing team, often these colleagues who are like know the processes very well, Global Fund processes, and who have like strong technical skills and experience. So I think we also need to differentiate a little bit around who is engaging at which stage. And I think we need to also be very mindful that, for instance, if you're a CCM representative or an alternate, about your role, about being in contact with your constituency and, capturing the needs, the priorities, the barriers to services of your constituencies and people that may not have the privilege to be represented at CCM discussions and so on. So I think there is also different levels of engagement, and I think especially around the point around people with disabilities, I think it's really important also to think through as a CCM member how to make sure that channels can be opened for them to contribute. I will post in the chat a list of countries as well, where through the Community Engagement Strategic Initiative, we are providing some technical assistance support. So I think these processes we are really aiming to do across constituencies, including youth and adolescents. So if you are from any of these countries and you're not involved yet, please feel free to reach out to me, because we really want to see how this support can go beyond the usual suspects and can really bring some voices from service users and who are facing like key barriers of accessing services to the table. And in some cases, this can be done by doing a brief survey online with your constituency. It can be done by like very informal, also capturing of experiences. This can be done through focus group discussions to make sure that if you're represented in a decision-making space, that you really can also take decisions that are very founded, or like, how do you say, well based on the experience of your community. I just also wanted to speak and manage a little bit expectations, because we always also have the question around, engaging in Global Fund processes throughout the country dialogue, and the question around becoming an implementer, becoming an SR and SSR. Now we see reduced funding levels for grant cycle aid, right? And we will most likely see some streamlining of implementation arrangements. So that will be very important to also manage some of the expectations around how many new implementers will a country be able to bring on board, and also think through what role you can maybe play if you're not an implementing organization. And some of you mentioned in the chat, strengthening relationships to PRs, to SRs, and to see how you can, provide input during implementation to to, for instance, flag risks around integration of services, propose mitigation measures, and continue making sure that access to services is equitable. And how this can, I think we need to think broadly also just beyond the position of being an implementer, also how to influence service integration from more like a ongoing advocacy perspective.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, for responding to that question. Festus, I hope that that kind of give you a little bit of info into how we can make the process a little bit more inclusive. And I think Annabelle mentioned just briefly there about putting into the chat some of the TA support that's offered to people. So, and thank you also, Annabelle, for taking the time to respond to the questions as well. We really do appreciate that. Bella, any thoughts and reactions that you have from those questions?
Yes, I think one event that really close is a country dialogue, and how disabilities people and LGBT communities could involve in the country dialogue is CCM require to bring all representation in the country dialogue. So that's the requirement. So I think the country dialogue needs to involve all of people, civil society, government, academia, and many people. So I think the LGBT community and also disabilities people could also join in the dialogue, because like we are having some discussion before we are making our country proposal. So I think that's also the requirement that CCM in the country needs to fulfill. So that means in the country dialogue, all the community should involve. And yeah, sometimes the more difficult it's to engage in all processes, which the advice is already given by Priscilla to contact the CCM member, because that's more strategic and make a good allies in the CCM. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bella. And I think that's all the time we have for our session, but I do want to encourage people to please stick around. We do have another panel discussion where you'll hear more from young people who are involved in the CCM and the process. So if you have any additional questions, you can also ask them then. I can already see on the side there are a few questions about there are no slides in this meeting, so we won't be sharing any slides, but the recording will be available on YouTube, so you can rewatch this back on there. And we'll also send out an email with any of the references or the resources that we discussed in our sessions. So you'll get a copy of that as well. Thank you so much, Annabelle, Priscilla, Bella, for your time. I think we really we can't thank you enough for carving out time and speaking with us and addressing some of the questions that we have about the GC8 process. I think that was very, very helpful for the young people that we have joining us here. Thank you so much. I'll now pass it off to my lovely colleague, Gabriella, to take it further.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for that great session. And well, I have a challenge right now because we're jumping into the second panel, so there is a lot of information. I'm asking you not to leave the webinar yet. Sticking to the practice, we're gonna talk a little bit more on how this looks in the real world and in practice, and learn from some good examples. But before that, let me introduce myself. I am Gabriela Romero, as you can see in the description. I'm a senior programs officer for Y+ Global. And what I basically do is I work with youth-led networks across different regions to strengthen how young people engage in the Global Fund processes, including GC8. From Y+ Global, I'm supporting the Youth to Youth Consortium, which is the only youth-led consortium within the Global Fund. This is a collaboration between YODA and Youth Lead. And yeah, over the past 5 years, I've been working with Y+, supporting young people to turn their priorities into influence, whether that's talking around advocacy, funding proposals, or engagement in national spaces like CCMs. And I'm very happy to be here. So yeah, let's move with the next session. And thank you all for being here today and for having the curiosity. I feel like right now we have an understanding of what GC8 is and why it matters and why is it important. But I know many of us are thinking, and maybe many of us are not very knowledgeable about the Global Fund. So we're asking ourselves, okay, what do we do with this information? How can we as individuals take the initiatives. So in the next session, we're going to make things a little bit more real and practical. And we're going to focus on how young people like us can actually engage and influence and navigate these processes in our own countries. So I'm really happy to be joined by an amazing youth leaders who are part of this panel discussions. We have Sherry from Mozambique, we have Linda from Malawi, we have Ruth from Uganda, and Marcel from Cameroon. So thank you all for being here, and I'm really excited to learn from all of you. I'll ask a few questions, and then I invite you to keep your answers short and practical so that we don't extend. Also, please be aware of speaking not so fast because we have live translations, and I know sometimes we get excited. I actually realized I was just explaining everything very fast. And just pretend you're giving advice to someone who is just starting or is not very familiar with the Global Fund. So I'm gonna move ahead, and it would be amazing if you could turn on your cameras, let us see your beautiful faces. I'm gonna start with Cherise. So, Cherise, let's start very simple. So, for example, if I'm part of a youth network and I want to engage into the Global Fund processes, what's the very first thing I should do?
Good morning, everyone. I'm fine. I speak in Portuguese because it's my first language and it's about inclusion. Thank you again for opportunity.
You're very welcome, Cherise. Go ahead.
Bom, ok, thank you. Bom, indo mesmo para a primeira questão, que tem a ver com de que forma nós podemos envolver os jovens ou redes que são lideradas por jovens, como é que eles podem estar envolvidos no processo do Fundo Global. É interessante, porque nós, enquanto rede, entramos no ano passado no mecanismo de coordenação do país, onde o Fundo Global canaliza os fundos para a implementação das atividades. Então, foi formada ano passado a Constituinte de Adolescentes Jovens e fez-se uma eleição. Onde estivemos nós, enquanto rede liderada por jovens, estiveram também várias outras organizações que são lideradas por jovens, e após a eleição foram 2 redes escolhidas para fazer parte da Constituinte de Adolescentes Jovens, onde uma é a nossa e temos a outra. Então, cada rede devia ter um representante. E para Moçambique, eu sou a representante, onde tenho participado das reuniões no mecanismo de coordenação do país. E também a segunda coisa muito importante que os jovens devem saber é como é que funciona o ecossistema nacional do Fundo Global. Como é que funciona a distribuição dos fundos, quais são as prioridades do Fundo Global a nível de Moçambique. Então, e também uma das coisas principais que os jovens devem perceber é que existe um mecanismo de coordenação do país. Então, é onde é canalizado os fundos e lá fazem parte diferentes entidades. Estou a falar do setor privado, estou a falar do Ministério da Saúde, estou a falar também da comunidade, né, que é representada também não só pela sociedade civil. Então, tem diferentes atores-chaves que fazem parte do mecanismo de coordenação do país. Então, é importante que os jovens conheçam isso também. E, depois disso, é importante que os jovens saibam quais são as principais prioridades, né, para as diferentes componentes, né? Porque sabemos que o Fundo Global tem uma estratégia e foca principalmente nas 3 doenças. Estou a falar da HIV, tuberculose e malária. Então, para cada componente, tem questões prioritárias que o Fundo Global procura financiar ou que o Fundo Global procura ajudar ou melhorar a nível do país. Então, é importante nós, enquanto jovens, eu em particular, ou a nossa rede, trabalha com jovens vivendo com HIV. Então, nós sabemos quais são os desafios, quais são as questões prioritárias que os jovens querem ver. Então, eu, como jovem, que agora faço parte do mecanismo de coordenação do país na Constituição dos Jovens, o que é que eu procuro fazer? Levar as preocupações, as necessidades dos jovens para fazer chegar, para que sejam identificadas assim, que é as prioridades. E agora, como a Priscila esteve a falar muito bem, está a ser desenhado o GC8, né? E nós agora estamos lá para representar os jovens. Então, nós também, antes de mais, em Moçambique também já foi, está a ser feita assim, que é o diálogo nacional. Eu participei como uma das oradoras. Antes fez-se uma discussão a nível das províncias. Eu fui participar em uma das províncias, fez-se uma escutação daquilo que eram as prioridades a nível daquela província, e isso foi feito durante 3 dias em todo o país. E já amanhã, e depois da manhã, nós faremos o diálogo nacional, a nível nacional, nesse caso, onde estarão representados algumas entidades, mas com certeza estarão lá a população-chave, a sociedade civil, a comunidade, mas não poderão estar todos, mas com certeza estarão representadas por alguns representantes das organizações. Então, é importante também.
Sorry, Sherry. I'm just gonna jump in because this is all very important information, and I'm trying to collect it, right?
Okay, I
But
understand.
let's try to keep it a little bit simple in terms of if there is one thing that you will have to suggest for young people when they need to start, like to get engaged, which one you will be selecting from I know you talk about knowing how the system works, knowing about the priorities, the coordination mechanisms. But what do you think for the very beginning? What will be crucial? Thank you.
Para uma pessoa que está a começar, principalmente as redes, é importante que haja uma comunicação entre a rede e o Estado ou o governo, né? Se nós fomos escolhidos para estar lá como uma rede, é porque nós temos uma boa comunicação com o mecanismo de coordenação do país. Nós temos convidados o mecanismo de coordenação do país para as nossas atividades, o que nós temos feito, e eles conseguiram perceber que nós conseguimos representar outros jovens. Por essa razão que nós atualmente fazemos parte do mecanismo de coordenação do país, porque fomos convidados a participar, a entender melhor sobre o mecanismo de coordenação e o Fundo Global. Então, é importante que os jovens tenham uma boa comunicação com o governo ou com as entidades do governo, para que assim seja fácil estar envolvidos nesses espaços. E não só, nós também temos uma boa comunicação com a ONU-SIDA, e a ONU-SIDA também procurou advocar para que nós, jovens, estivéssemos lá incluídos nestes processos. Obrigada.
Thank you. And I love all of this information. It seems like there is a lot of experience talking. And yeah, I mean, starting is always the hardest part, right? But from what we're hearing, Cherise, there is the first step should be also curiosity, right? Curiosity for knowing strategies, curiosity asking around, getting to know the CCM members. And yeah, most important, what you were saying, start connecting with the networks and the national environment. So love that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna jump into our next question and our next speaker. So Linda, I can't see Linda here with the spotlight.
I'm here.
Oh, I see you. Hi, how are you, Linda? Yes, I see you in pink.
Yes.
Great. So building on what Cherise was previously saying, how do you think that we actually prepare our priorities in a way that people will take them seriously? because sometimes we have ideas, but they don't always are heard. So how do we actually prepare our priorities in a way that people would take them seriously?
All right, thank you so much. It is very important to make sure that when we're in those rooms, our information is backed up by evidence. Because sometimes when you're just speaking nothing for us without us, it doesn't really make sense. So I think the first step that can help the CCM representatives is to make sure that we are partnering with other development partners and also the principal recipient, the ones that implement Global Fund activities on ground, because these can help us financially, but also they can also offer technical support. So during the grant making process, I think it's very important to make sure that before the national consultation, we are actually engaging, but also we are actually meeting prior, meeting all the young people all the way from grassroots in order to identify the priorities. When we say priorities, we're not just saying nothing for us without us. No, the actual priorities that are actually on the ground. Because, for example, I'll just give an example of Malawi. In Malawi, the priorities that can be found in the southern region and the priorities that we can find at the central region are actually different. Because, for example, in the southern part of Malawi, it is always consistently hit by cyclone or other climate conditions. And then at the end of the day, the priorities mostly will be maybe young people not adhering to drugs, the issue of I'm seeing in the comment section people are saying that they cannot hear me. So
Okay. Sorry, I think it's probably because so you probably can hear Linda because you need to switch to the English channel, I guess. So let me just write it here because they can hear us.
Yeah.
So for everyone who can hear us, we need to change to the English channel. Is that correct, Tawanda? Not that I'm sending people to the wrong channel. Okay. I hope you can hear Linda now. Yes, I see. I can hear you. Okay. Okay. Amazing. You can continue, Linda.
I should start over. I should just continue from where I stopped.
You can just recap very short and then continue.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I was saying, for young people to actually be heard of, for young people to actually influence the decisions during the grant making process, is that number one, we need to make partnership with other development partners that are actually willing to help us financially and also to offer technical support. So why I was saying this is that there's a great need for prior engagement, consultation meetings before the actual national consultation. Because sometimes it happens that they'll just tell you today to say, tomorrow we're having the national consultation. So if you haven't prepared enough, it becomes problematic. That's when sometimes when you're in those meetings, you just state nothing for us without us, with confidence, but sometimes it doesn't really carry weight. The other thing I was emphasizing to say that gathering of the priorities will help us, the CCM representatives, to actually defend or to actually advocate for the priorities using evidence, but also partnering up with a principal recipient, those that implement Global Fund programs on ground. They do have evidence to say with the GC7, this is the evidence that or the priorities that we think are actually really important, and we know that it can help us if we actually touch base on this one. So that is number one. The second one is that there's a need for us to be part of the grant writing process, because it's one thing to just know what the Global Fund, but it's also another thing of understanding priorities. Understanding priorities would help us to make sure that even during the grant writing process, everything that we actually have been discussing previously is actually well incorporated in the modular framework. And I think another thing that we can use in order to make sure that we are being heard in those decision-making spaces is to understand the current affairs. Because understanding the current affairs would actually help us in order to make sure that the priorities that we're actually advocating for or the real issues that are happening on ground. For example, here in Malawi, I think one of the pressing issues that we're having is the issue of our cyclone. You know, we've been advocating for U is equal to U, but when cyclone actually hits, it means people find it hard to actually adhere to drugs because the medicine have been washed away with a cyclone, and also the issue of confidentiality becomes problematic. The issue of gender-based violence cases increasing, it also becomes problematic. So aligning the priorities with the current affairs would actually make more sense to say, okay, they know what they are doing. As I think Priscilla was saying, to say that in those decision-making spaces, it is where you find the government wants to prioritize what they want, and the civil societies, including this, what they feel like it should the current affairs. I think it really helps. And another thing that can also help us is to make sure. Should I continue?
Yes, you can just be very briefly with the last thing.
I'm almost done. So another thing that can also help us is to make sure that we are continuing empowering youth-led organizations and also youth networks for them to fully understand what Global Fund is all about, the priorities, the writing process, because this is actually very important. And for us to actually get those priorities, we need to work hand in hand with young people, even from those hard-to-reach areas. Also, one last thing that also can help us in making sure that we have gathered enough issues or priorities that is backed up by data is for us to continue lobbying up for funding, because sometimes it might happen that I know the priorities, but what about the other youth members? What about people from the other constituencies? And when it comes to process, it happens that only a few people have been supported. For funding can help us in making sure that there's enough people that are actually representing if during the whole grant writing process. And we need to also make sure I've also remembered something that is really important: understanding the Global Fund priorities before actually starting the priorities in the in our countries. And another thing is that
I'm gonna cut you there, Linda. Sorry.
So
sorry. I know we could sit down here and talk like 5 hours about all the great things, and I think it's a great example that you're bringing. I love how you connected your suggestions to real examples. That's what we want to see. So from what I'm hearing, and I think is really important, and we sometimes often forget about it, is data collection. Make sure we are prepared with data so that we can back up our arguments, our ideas, our proposals. The second one is knowing your communities, knowing who they are. That comes along also with the data. I hear also about knowing the priorities. Yeah, and the fourth one that you were saying was empowering young people, making sure that we are empowering the youth-led networks and that they're aware of what is happening in the Global Fund. It's such a beautiful package of different things that need to be working aligned. But I love how you remind us of the importance of data. Very, very, very important. So thank you, Linda, for sharing that with us. We're gonna move forward to our next speaker, which is Ruth. Ruth, from your experience, how do you build relationships with people in power, like CCM members or government members?
Thank you so much. I love that question, but to be able to answer that question, I just want to create a picture of the CCM architecture or structure in Uganda. So CCM Uganda operates through a secretariat, what Priscilla alluded to as the admin, CCM admin. So we have here a secretariat that supports coordination and implementation of the Global Fund grants. And then the CCM is overseen by the board, which I'm a member of. I represent the youth on that board, and the board functions as a multi-stakeholder platform that focuses on mostly decision making. And we usually call this more of a parliament. It gives that feeling of a parliament if you know how parliament operates. And then also the board is composed of 17 constituencies, and that includes the people living with HIV, the key populations, the people affected by TB, the people affected by malaria, and others. And also that includes academia, private sector, UN agencies, and other bilateral partners as well, all seated on the board. So this is high level platform. And in that, we have people like the permanent secretary of Ministry of Health. We have people from Ministry of Finance. We have people from the local government seated on this. So if you can look at it clearly, the architecture and the composition of the board, to a young person, this feels very intimidating, especially if you're not well informed, if you do not know how to navigate such a space, which sometimes become highly political, and no one would remember that you're a young person. So you have to be on their level to be able to influence the decisions in there. So now what we do here, I am not working alone. So as the youth, we are there on the board as co-opted members together, and the other population that is co-opted, that is the refugees. So youth, we are not like fully members of the board, but we are just co-opted members, and we leverage that platform with several of these high-level stakeholders to be able to represent our voices, to be able to push the youth agenda. And just a very quick example is that, as already explained, that mentioned that we are co-opted. At the moment, we are co-opted, but it came with limitations and influence in decision making when board meetings are happening. Even participation, because the time came and you have to not participate. So we had to lobby with different members of CCM to be able to support us to be fully members of the CCM board. And we had to work with different stakeholders. We had to engage them also informally, beyond the board sittings. You have to engage them outside, and then, you give them reason. And I love here that evidence here has really come out strongly, that you have to give them the reason why they should support us. So given that background, we've been able to lobby with this and leverage this platform to be able to influence decisions. So yes, basically that. Then I think I can pause there because I don't really, I saw that was another question, so.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, you have addressed the first one very well, and lobbying is so important, and building alliances, right? From what I'm hearing. But like you were saying, it could be a little bit intimidating for a young person that steps in the first time into a room full of, like older people, or because we think they might have better expertise. What would be your advice for all the young people that are just starting to step into that, or eventually it will get into that situation?
So as already mentioned, relationship building. So, and this comes with developing yourself with very good soft skills, such as the building your interpersonal skills to be able to collaborate with all these stakeholders. It becomes your tool of influence as a young person. And also have the grit, because not always that you would your ideas will be taken, and sometimes it becomes very intense, and then you'll be just put aside. And if you do not have that resilience to be able to step forward, to have the courage to keep going, you'll be left out. Like, people will keep moving on and you'll be left out. So you need to cultivate that grit to be able to beyond just pushing forward, to maintaining sustained commitment, and also making sure that you're committed as well. And then being visible, because on that board, as I already said, that you can be taken over. You have to be visible. You have to make sure that your point is taken. At some point, yes, we have to be diplomatic. We have to balance diplomacy and the activism. So as a community person, you need to have both. And where diplomacy fails, then that's when activism comes in. So you need to know, and still again pointing back to us, requesting for a full board sitting to make sure that we are young people fully represent and fully participate. So we used all our diplomacy until we weren't listened to, and then we had to stand up. We had to stand up in one of the meetings to make sure that we are seen. So we are seen. So you have to know where, when, and where to make sure that your voice is heard and you are visible in the board. And yes, we finally got our full board seat. We finally got our full board seat, and we won't be limited anymore. And then yes, I think I've read, yes. Then the final one is, so the board, the whole, even the GC8, the documents are very complex in nature, especially for a young person. Most young people that I represent on the board have never been to school. They do not know how to read. They do not know how to write. But there are those that have been able to go to school and they can read and understand. So we engage people that can we build capacity of people that can read, so that they're able to translate the technicalities and the complexities of the whole process to other members, so that everyone is brought on board. So it's making sure that strengthening our technical capacity to ensure that youth voices are informed, evidence-based, and taken seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. I love how you brought us like a little toolbox on what do we have to learn for to become more courageous, and if we want to build powerful relationships with CCM members or with influential people, right? I like what you said about visibility is important. I like what you said about like building an alliance, joining other people so that we can step out and stand up and become stronger. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. We're gonna move forward to the next speaker, and then we're gonna jump into the questions. So let's go with our next speaker, which is Marcel from Cameroon. And I think in Cameroon, we have a great example of working together and working across different diseases. So Marcel, I would like to ask you if you could share with us, how can youth networks collaborate better instead of working isolated?
Can everyone get me?
We hear you loud and clear.
The session has been a wonderful one. I've been listening from the beginning and I've learned a lot, and it's a privilege to share my experience all the way from Kajet, Cameroon. How can youth work better in terms of networking to ensure that we achieve a common goal? I think we have worked together with so many youths under so many initiatives with the Global Fund with Y Plus Global. And this includes meetings like consultative meetings, youth consultative meetings, which we've brought together youths to gather their challenges and solutions to these challenges. And we've also consulted professionals to bring out documents that maps out youth networks that works under HIV, TB, and malaria. And you'll be shocking to know that we have more than 2,000 networks in Cameroon that work under HIV, TB, and malaria and are not part of the process. I think we have just about 20% of this network that is actively participating in the process, and we are left out with about 80%. And how can we bring
Marcel, I don't know if it's only me. Sorry to interrupt you.
Into the process, because I think
it is difficult, right? Marcel, sorry, We're losing you.
With one hand.
Hi.
You need two hands.
Let me just send him a. Hi, Marcel. Can you hear me?
Can you get me?
Yeah, we were losing you. We lost you. You froze for a little bit. I don't know if maybe it's the internet connection. So I think we all stayed when you were sharing that you have collaborated and you have mapping out the organizations in Cameroon and you have over 2,000 and then we lost you.
Okay, so can I
If
kick
you
off
could
from
go
there?
on. Yes, please.
Okay. So, like I was saying, it's very important that we work together because these organizations actually know the challenges on ground and they have the solutions that we need in mapping out the specific points where we can apply for the grants and ensure that every youth affected by TB, malaria, and HIV are benefiting from these grants effectively. And the only solution we have is creating platforms and more networks that include all of these other organizations. Now, these documents which has been developed has been distributed with the CCM, and I think it is in their place to ensure that with this data collected, they can reach out to these organizations and seek their consent to build up a body or a platform of all of the organizations that touch the programs of HIV, TB, and malaria, so that together we can have solutions that are very inclusive and that targets all our challenges. So I think this is the best way we can really include every youth organization. We also have digital platforms which we've created that are national. We have on WhatsApp because that's the local most popular platform which youth in Cameroon use. We have also our website, Youth Against Pandemics, where we are trying or we are updating information which we develop and other issues about the Global Fund. So these are little strides which we are putting together to ensure that we collaborate for better.
Thank you, Marcel. I think we are losing you again for. Hi, sorry, Marcel. We lost you again, but I think we got the main answer. What a wonderful idea to make this connection between HIV, malaria, and TB. I think this is a unique example of having young people working across the three diseases and being strategic and building this network. I think it's also very unique. You were talking about the Youth Against Pandemics. Perhaps, and this is going to be our last question, you could share with us what was the motivation of, like collaborating across these three diseases, and how is that going? Is because we're talking about like the networking and the ways of young people working together, right?
Okay, please, I will just switch devices so maybe you can get me better. I don't know.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead. Go ahead. We can put you in the spotlight. Yeah, there you go. But now we try again. I think you need to go to the English room. Maybe you are in the original audio.
Can you get me now?
Yes, we get you now. Great.
Please, I would like to get your question again.
Sorry, Marcel, I was just like, just a last question. You talk about the Youth Against Pandemics, and I think Cameroon is such a good example of this networking, of this collaboration across the three diseases, right? We have here examples mainly looking into HIV, but here we have young people working across malaria, HIV, and TB. So I would like to know what was the motivation behind, and if you could let us know how is that going?
Okay, the motivation behind creating these youth networks and the Youth Against Pandemic platforms was based on our consultative meetings, young persons, because our model here at CAGED is getting from the people. Most solutions or initiatives comes from people assuming that this is what the population needs. But we rather do our case studies and we find out what works best and then we work with what works best. So it's not really easy coordinating youth, but it's going well. As I would say, we have a youth advisory group where we have selected some youths from around Cameroon who are coordinating and ensuring that we engage more youth, and that each program from CEC project is implemented in a way that is very youth-friendly, because we want to ensure that youth get this information as easy as possible. And we also print out this information in a way that is attractive to youth. So I think for now it's going smooth, and we are looking forward to GC8.
Thank you, Marcel. This is great. Thank you for sharing that experience with us. Again, congratulations on that way of collaborating better across the different diseases. And thank you all for being here. This was really powerful. I think I'm gonna jump now into the questions. We have, I think, 10 minutes for questions. So please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. This is the space to ask the experts. Yes, Ruth, I see you have raised your hand.
Sorry. Just before the questions come in, I just wanted to let our young people on call to know that we developed as the CCM, the youth representatives from different countries on CCM managed to collaborate and come up with the position, and I think that would be shared by Faith. So I just wanted to pass that information. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for that information. Okay, do we have any other questions to our speakers? I see our speakers are, is it Festus? Linda, you can go ahead. I can only see these hands and.
Okay. Thank you so much. I also wanted to add on what Ruth said. We also developed, Women for Global Fund developed a toolkit that all the youth representatives can actually use in order for them to understand the Global Fund processes, the writing processes, and the grant making process as a whole. So I wanted to emphasize on that one in case anyone might need to use the toolkit. I think it's very important with what Ruth was saying, to say that the Global Fund information is actually really comprehensive. Sometimes it's a bit hard for a young person to actually understand all the processes at once. But this toolkit has actually, to access the toolkit, you can actually go on the Women for Global Fund website and then you'll find it. Thank you so much, and over.
Thank you, Linda. These are great news. Perhaps maybe if you can share with us the link in the chat box, and then we can also keep it for us. We can share it with everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. I see Festus, your hand is up. And then Grace.
Yes. I'll go first, Gabriela.
Yes, go ahead.
It's in the afternoon in Kenya. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes. My question goes to Ruth and Linda. They look vibrant. They are energetic. My question really goes to have you seen a youth representative with disability in the CCM? And when I'm talking about disability, I am talking about a youth with a sophisticated type of disability, like being hard of hearing, or being deaf, or even being blind, or even being deaf blind, who has been brought to levels of country coordinating mechanisms where Ruth, you sit, And Linda, you said that the people that are far are in far to reach areas. You've been very intentional about reaching them. I would also be interested to know, are you categorically looking the direction of youth with diverse disabilities in the far to reach areas? And what strategies are you coming up with to make sure that these young people with disabilities are also reached? I understand a lot of issues of young people from different regions is in SRHR or in the ASRHR, whereby adolescent sexual reproductive health rights have to be something of importance to the group that we all represent, and it is so diverse for young people with difficulties in how they put concept to paper, like persons with intellectual disabilities, for example, who would require pictures to understand some of the ideologies. How best are you reaching this constituent of young
Thank you,
people
Festus.
in your
Thank you for
countries?
your
Thank you.
question. A very important question now that we're talking about inclusion and integration. Let's be very mindful about time. So please, Ruth and Linda, if you can just briefly respond maybe in 2 minutes so that we can take one more question and then move on. Thank you.
Okay. Linda, would you want to go
Go
first
ahead,
or
Ruth.
I go first?
Yeah,
You can go ahead, Ruth.
So yes. So that's a very important question. Inclusion is very, very key to the work that we do. And my colleague from Cameroon was explaining how youth-led networks are working together. So we use a similar model in the country that we have youth-led networks that serve the young people with disabilities, and we make sure that in the room during the consultation meetings we have someone who is able to do the sign language, like someone skilled in that area, so that even the people with hearing impairment are able to follow the discussion. So we usually have someone to be in that room to assist people with disabilities. And then far to reach areas, reaching out far to reach young people in far to reach areas. Still, so in our country, we usually have quarterly engagements with our constituencies, and what we do is that we move out of the urban areas and go to remote districts where we can have this conversation. Breaking down, you talked about intellectual disability, so we make sure that we don't bring the technical language from the board. We have to use the community language, the way how it is. And if you've noticed, even with ChatGPT, we utilize that to help you break down the language, and so that we are all on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And Linda, I'm gonna give you 1 minute. Thank you.
I don't even know where to start because I think she has already explained everything. So similarly here in Malawi, that's what we are also doing. We have a WhatsApp forum for all the youth-led networks, but also all the youth-led organizations. So in those WhatsApp forum, we also have people that are representing people living with disabilities. And in terms of the hard-to-reach areas, most of the times, for example, with the funding shrinkage right now, we normally use WhatsApp. Sometimes we also use WhatsApp calls for us to actually communicate with everyone. And this is actually really possible. And it's actually one of the cheapest way to actually communicate with everyone. And in terms of the people that are with intellectual difficulties, most of the times we use a native language when we're discussing issues to do with our Global Fund and its priorities, because we understand that there's also a language barrier. You can't mostly when we're having this conversation with people that are from hard to reach areas, especially in the rural areas, most of the time some of them they don't even understand English. So we use the native language for us to actually communicate with everyone, so that everyone should be able to understand. And having a representative from the networks that are people living with disabilities, we also make sure that we have also brought up the technical expertise that are actually able to actually interpret. And even when we're booking for a venue, when we're having a physical meeting, we make sure that the venue that we're booking is actually disability friendly. For example, if someone is living with disabilities and they don't walk, mostly we book the venue that will not require the stairs, in order to make sure that everyone is actually included. So that was actually a very good question, and we're being very intentional about it. In the GC8, our advocacy point is also to make sure that we are also advocating for people living with disabilities when we talk about all the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. That was great wrapping up. All right. What a good timing to ask this question and make us feel more conscious about young people living with disabilities. I think it's a good moment. We need to move forward to the next session. And apologies for that. We're running out of time. So Grace and Cassidy, I'm gonna invite you to share your question in the chat so that our speakers can respond to you, because this is also space to make good questions. Thank you to all of our speakers. We're gonna move forward to the next point in the agenda, and I'm gonna give my word to my colleague Cindy. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry we ran out of time.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, for that powerful panel and moderating that powerful panel. But in general, thank you to all the speakers for sharing with us your insights. And thank you to really everyone who joined us today, especially the young people, the youth-led networks. My name is Cindy Amaiza, and I work as the Her Voice Fund Manager at Y Plus Global, which is weird because I'm here to do the closing reflections and the key takeaways for this webinar. So as we close, I just want to leave us with 3 clear reflections from this webinar. I hope that during your time with us, you have been able to understand that Global Fund Cycle 8 is not just a funding cycle for us. This is a real opportunity for us as young people, as youth-led networks, to shape the national priorities on HIV, TB, malaria, and in general health systems for the next 3 years. So we have heard from the different panelists talking about if we want our priorities on the table in the budgets and even during implementation, then we cannot start our engagement at the very last, or we cannot come in the middle. We have to start and engage early. We have to stay organized, and we have to be consistent throughout the process. We also have to be meaningfully engaged. This means that we have to remain coordinated. We have to be evidence-based. And one of our panelists here, Bella, shared that we will not just be engaged because we are young people. We have to work with our CCM representatives, our allies, government, principal recipients, to get the information that we need, to get to understand where exactly are we in the process, to get to also know maybe the ins and outs of which meetings are being held, what time and where. We also need to be very clear about what we are asking for in the entire processes, because most of the time we come to the table, every young person has different priorities. This community maybe has a different priority, and this other one has different priorities. So we have to ensure that when we come to the table, we are coming in with a joint voice, joint priorities, after we have engaged different community members, different youth populations, including young people with disabilities. And we have to then also bring that evidence to the table, because Priscilla mentioned earlier that if we come to the table and we have nothing in terms of our evidence. We have nothing in terms of why we want maybe a specific priority of ours to be included, then it's nothing. I think Annabelle had also mentioned that we have to ensure these priorities are in line with national health plans or strategic plans that are being developed. So we have to look internally and see if our countries are developing a national strategy, we have to start them. And then we have to ensure that we are checking if this information is also inside the Global Fund modular framework to be able to put it as a priority in the major priorities that we want to put into the Global Fund Cycle 8 processes. And then one of the things that is also a very key takeaway from me would be that we have clearly said, be it in the chat, be it the speakers, be it the panelists, we have clearly said that if youth voices are to influence GC8, then our voices need to be at the table, and we have to be coordinated, informed, and we have to be backed by evidence at all times, so that our priorities are still at the table in the final document, because sometimes we come in and put the priorities in the early documents, maybe in the consultation processes, but then we are lacking in the writing processes and things like that. So when things are being prioritized, like Annabelle said, we have to get like the top 20, for example. We have to ensure that our priorities are also part of the top 20 that are being prioritized. And it doesn't mean that all the 20 will be in the final document, but we can get in at least 3, 4, 5 that are very good and we think will help us with solving the issues that are affecting adolescents and young people. Before we close, I just want to share with you that we will be reaching out to you via your emails that you used to register with, and share with you some of the tools that we have received, both in this webinar, but also in the within our circles that we know, maybe specific tools or documents. You can also reach us at Y Plus Global to be able to share with us if you have any tools that you want to share before end of day, and then we will compile all these tools using a link and share with all our participants. So going forward, I just want to encourage you to organize nationally, agree on your shared priorities for GC8, reach far and wide, not just the usual maybe people that you know, reach far and wide to know the different issues affecting communities of young people who have faced TB, malaria, SRHR, young people living with HIV, young key populations, adolescent girls and young women, and just to ensure that their priorities are all joined together with your priorities that you will be developing. And then we need to remember to follow all the processes, not just one, all the processes to be able to engage in everything. Finally, Ruth Akulu said something that I felt we cannot go without. And she said, where advocacy fails, that's where activism comes in. And with that, I want to give it back and say thank you very much and have a great and wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Bye, everyone.